I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. We had a really interesting show today, and actually today is Bat Appreciation Day.
Yes, so National Bat Appreciation Day.
Exactly. Yeah. So we kind of worked that into our show.
Yeah, no doubt. Really excited about today's show. Thank you all for being with us. We have Miss Franny Preston with us today. She's going to be talking about gardening for bats.
That's a cool topic. I never thought about that.
Franny just has so many skills. I'm really excited to learn about this one. Because I know you and I are both avid gardeners, and I'm sure many of our viewers out there and listeners are gardeners as well. So I'm really excited to hear about Franny. Maybe we can kind of change our gardening plans a little bit based on what Franny teaches us today. And then we also have, our reoccurring Wings of Kentucky segment with Dr. DJ McNeil. Yes. And he's going to be talking about some early season migrants that we're going to see in the area. So, I always love DJ's presentations. He does such a good job. We really appreciate Dr. McNeil's work. So, folks, glad to have you all with us as well. If you all have questions for our presenters, you can use the chat function, or if you're on YouTube, you can hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we can respond that way. But Renee, delighted to be with you today on this beautiful day.
I know it's been wonderful in Kentucky. But let's go ahead and get started. So Franny, if you want to turn your camera on. Welcome back to the show. We appreciate you being on.
I'm excited to talk about bats today.
Yes, we're excited to learn. Yes, especially gardening for bats.
I know, I love it.
I don't know if you heard us, Franny, but we're big gardeners.
Yes.
And so we like the idea of maybe doing something for our winged friends, whether they be birds or bats.
Right.
So, yes.
A little bit of an interesting topic, because you might not think that you can garden for bats, but we'll talk about how you can do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing it. We appreciate you.
So as Renee said, it is International Bat Appreciation Day. Bats are international animals. There's 1,400 species of them. So there's a lot of bats to love and to learn about. Again, my name is Franny Preston. I'm the Invasive Species Outreach Coordinator here at UK. All right, so let's dive in. All right, so why do we need to care about bats? Why are we focusing on them? Why do we have a Bat Appreciation Day? Well, they need our help. So like I said, there's 1,400 bat species, or maybe even more, throughout the world. And unfortunately, a lot of them are in decline. I want to say about over 50% of them in the United States or within North America are in decline for different reasons. And we're going to talk about why. So 23 of them, of the 1,400 species worldwide, are critically endangered, which means they're really close to extinction, unfortunately. 85 of them are endangered, so they're getting on that way. 113 of them are vulnerable. And then 236 of these species don't really have enough data, so they might also be in dire straits. Now, why are bat populations declining so much? Well, for one, just like a lot of other wildlife and plant species, it's due to habitat loss. So different bats in different species, different areas, they're going to live in slightly different habitats. Of course, some of them are cave-dwelling species, some of them are forest-dwelling species and live in trees. But regardless, as human populations are growing and we're living in more areas, unfortunately, the natural areas where bats live are being taken away. This is an interesting one that I recently learned about. So bat populations are actually also declining because of wind energy. Now, wind energy and other renewable energy, of course, we want to have around. We want renewable energy to help stop things like climate change. But unfortunately, there's a downside to it. They're doing more research on how to make wind energy a little bit safer for bats. And the reason that it is dangerous is bats will run into these turbine blades. And you might be thinking, okay, bats are really good at echolocation. How are they running into these giant objects? Well, there's a couple different reasons. One of which, if they're migrating in big groups, they're not necessarily focused in, it might be dark outside and they simply don't see them. They don't know they're there, or the blades are moving too fast for them to calculate it. Or they might be hunting and they get too close to the blades, and the air pressure can actually harm the bats just by being right next to the spinning blades. Bats might also try to roost in wind turbines because they're warm, or they just think that they're good structures to roost in, and then they get injured. And so thankfully they are doing some research on how to combat this. One of the ways that they can do that is by slowing the blades down at certain times of the year if bats are migrating through, or even certain times of the day if they know that they're most active in that area. All right, so we weren't going to get through a presentation without me talking about invasive species. So I'll start with how invasive wildlife are harming bats. And this is across the world, not just in Kentucky or the United States. First and foremost, cats. So I'm sure you have heard at this point about how cats are really detrimental to bird species. And they are unfortunately also very detrimental to bats as well. So cats can jump higher than you think, and so they might grab bats at night when they're flying around hunting low for insects, or they might climb trees and get them then. But regardless, please keep your cats inside. It's better for your cat and it's better for the bats as well. Now, some invasive species are competing with the bats for their food. An example of this is starlings, which are invasive here in the US, and they're eating some of the insects that the bats would eat. And goats is an interesting one, but again, a lot of bats will eat insects that rely on plants, and then the goats are eating the plants that the insects rely on, so it's messing up the whole food chain. Now, in rats, there are some invasive rats as well, and these will go and eat the bats. They'll climb into their roost and harm them. The same for some invasive snakes, and the same for some invasive fire ants as well. Now, invasive plants can harm bats as well. This one's a little bit more indirect, but definitely still having a problem. So invasive plants are non-native plants that are causing harm in an ecosystem. And one of the ways that they cause harm is that they outcompete native plants. And there are native insects the bats are eating that rely on the native plants. And so when the invasive species come through and wipe out a bunch of plants and decrease plant diversity, they decrease insect diversity, thus the bats are harmed. You might have heard of this problem that bats are facing, even here in Kentucky, and it is a pathogen called white nose syndrome. And it's a fungus that affects bat species, particularly ones that roost together in colonies because they're more tightly packed and it's spread a little bit easier. And what white nose syndrome does is it actually will keep the bats awake when they're supposed to be hibernating, or wake them up a little bit earlier. And then they don't have the resources to keep up their energy needs. And unfortunately, that is decreasing bat populations as well. You can help with this by, if you are visiting caves, make sure to use all of the sanitation stations they have. Make sure you're cleaning off all of your equipment and sterilizing everything before you go to another cave. Another reason why bat populations are declining is because people will just kill them outright due to misunderstanding them. I don't know about you guys, but I have seen a lot of movies and TV shows that depict bats as villains. And I'll admit, if you've ever seen The Great Mouse Detective, that movie still scares me to this day because of the bat in it. Because they're always depicted as the villain, and it could be because they come out at night and they're just a little bit more mysterious to us because of that, or because people associate them with vampires. But regardless, we don't have anything to fear from bats. Again, a lot of them are just running around, flying around, eating bugs. And vampire bats, they're not in Kentucky, so you don't have to worry about those at all. And where vampire bats do exist, they don't turn into people, although that would be really interesting. And most of the time, they'll go after larger animals, which can include livestock. But again, most of the time, they're not attacking people. Another misconception that is widely spread about bats is that they carry rabies. And while they can carry rabies, it's a lower percentage than what people might think. And in the United States, on average, only 1.5 people per year contract rabies from bats. And most of the time, that's people who are constantly handling them, such as bat researchers. And you're way more likely to get rabies from a feral dog than a bat. So it's illegal to handle bats, but if you don't handle them, then you have a very, very low chance of getting rabies from bats. All right, so we talked about the reasons that their populations are declining, but why should we care about them? Well, bats, again, throughout the world, different species are going to have different roles in their ecosystems, and they all are very important. So I'll talk about the insectivores first. An insectivore just means they are insect eaters. So all of the bats that we have here in Kentucky are insectivores. They all only eat insects. I have pictured here a little brown bat, and it's very aptly named, and they can eat 1,200 insects an hour. So I don't know about you guys, but I like sitting outside on summer evenings, and I don't enjoy the mosquitoes. Now imagine we don't have any bats, and so there's quite literally nothing to eat the mosquitoes at night. How miserable that would be. And bats also control agricultural pest insect populations as well. And so they are very key insectivores to the environment because they kind of have the night shift of the insect eaters. In other parts of the world, bats are pollinators because some of them eat nectar, just like some birds or insect pollinators do. One of which, the one I have pictured, is a Mexican long-nosed bat. And this bat species really likes to get the nectar from agave plants. So if you like margaritas, you've got this bat to thank for pollinating it. They go in there and they get the pollen out. And while they do that, the pollen gets on their fur. They transfer it to another plant, just like a bird species would. And there are also fruit-eating bats, especially in warmer places like Australia or New Guinea, like the one I have pictured here. This is a giant golden-crowned flying fox, and flying foxes are the biggest bat species in the world. They're really cute and they're really cool to look at too, but they like to eat fruit, such as figs. And so just like birds or other animals that eat fruit and then move to other places, and poop it out, and then it spreads throughout the ecosystem, bats do the same thing. All right, so I've got listed here our Kentucky bats. And again, they are all insect eaters in Kentucky. We do have 14 bat species that are permanent or seasonal residents of Kentucky, but there are 16 total that have been recorded or are sometimes in Kentucky. Got them all listed here. And I have pictured here an evening bat. I took that picture. He was not thrilled that we were doing some research on him, but he looks like he's smiling anyways. Go back. Okay, so now we know why bats are in trouble and why we should care about them, but how should we go about doing that? Well, for one, we can garden for bats. And you might be thinking, okay, how am I supposed to garden for bats in Kentucky if none of them are eating nectar, none of them are eating fruit, they're all eating insects? Well, really you're gardening for moths and other insects instead, but it's helping the bats out. So when you are outside, we were just talking about gardening before we started. When you're outside right now and you're thinking about maybe some new plants to add to your garden, you can think about helping the bats out as well by adding native plants. So you definitely don't want to plant plants that are on Kentucky's invasive plant list, but if you plant native plants, they're especially helpful because the insects that the bats are eating have interactions with these plants. They're specially adapted to them, and so they will attract those insects. And if you can plant a variety of them, that'll make your garden even more unique, and it'll attract a variety of insects for the bats. And if possible, reduce insecticide use. So again, the bats are there to eat the insects, so you don't need to use the insecticides anyway. All right, so again, we're going to kind of focus on moths for the next couple of slides and how you can attract moths because they're some of bats' favorite food. And if you are choosing some flowers to plant for moths in your garden, you can choose flowers that are pale or dull red, purple, pink, or white. I have pictured here common milkweed plant that fits that description. It's really great for a lot of pollinators, including hummingbird moths like this snowberry clearwing, which are really cool moths. And you can also choose flowers that have a strong, sweet smell. That's fun to have as well, especially when they're emitted at night, because that's what's going to attract the moths the best. And there are yucca plants that are native to Kentucky. And they have big white showy flowers, and they have a strong smell that's emitted at night, and they attract yucca moths, which are really cute, as you can see right there. They're little fuzzy white moths. All right, now let's say you've got your flowers picked out, but maybe you've got some larger space and you want to plant some shrubs or some trees. You can also think about planting some host plants as well for the larvae and the eggs of different moth species, because a lot of different pollinators and other insects, they don't just need the plants when they're adults for their nectar, they also need them for safety when they're eggs, or for eating the leaves when they're growing up. Got a Cecropia moth caterpillar pictured here, and this guy was about that big, so he was pretty cool and is going to make a beautiful moth this spring. He is on a buttonbush plant, which is one of my favorite native plants, and they've also got some flowers that attract bees and butterflies as well. All right, so feel free to take a picture of this slide, but this is just a list of some different trees and shrubs and perennials, just suggestions for your Kentucky bat garden. You can also, I got this from wildones.org on their Southern Kentucky chapter website. They've got some really great resources for bat gardens in Kentucky as well. And all of these plants are native to Kentucky. All right, so we've got our beautiful bat gardens ready, but what else can we do for them? Well, if you're a woodland owner or you live near the woods, maybe your backyard is right up next to them. One thing that you can do in the fall is leave the leaves on the ground. So I know a lot of us will rake our leaves and send them away for aesthetic reasons, but the bats and other animals actually really need the leaves to stay there, especially when they're at the base of trees, including the eastern red bat, which in my personal opinion is the cutest bat that we have in Kentucky. I've got one pictured right there. And red bats will actually hang out on oak trees because they'll keep their leaves a little bit later in the fall than other trees. So you might be able to see them hanging on to leaves or right next to leaves in the fall. But they also will use the leaves at the base of a tree to kind of hibernate and stay warm as well. So if you're able to leave the leaves on the ground, even if it's just at the base of the tree, you can help out some bats. And you can also include some shagbark hickories. These are one of my favorite trees, but shagbark hickories and shellbark hickories and other trees with the big flaky bark that kind of flakes off are really great for some tree-dwelling bat species such as the Indiana bat. And this is one of the 3 bat species in Kentucky that is endangered. And Indiana bats, they will actually hang out up in that bark, and that's where they roost. So it's pretty cool. And if you're hiking through your woodlands or hiking through a park and you see a shagbark hickory this summer, look up into the eaves and see if you can see one. All right. And we can also help out bats by building them houses or buying them houses. And you don't have to live next to the woods for this. I live in a suburban area in an apartment, and there was a bat outside of my house a couple days ago. So they are thankfully everywhere, eating the insects everywhere. And you should be able to have a bat house in your yard or attached to your house even. And a great resource for this is Bat Conservation International. They've got some really great resources to determining what size and shape and color bat house you need for the bat species in your area. And again, that's on Bat Conservation International. I took this at the Woodlands Nature Station. They've got some really great native plant gardens. And because of that, it attracts a lot of moths and other insects. And they've got some bat houses up as well. And almost 100 bats can fit in that little box. So they're doing a really great job. And I just took this picture because the vultures thought the bat houses were so great that they wanted to be a bat for a day too. All right, so I really appreciate you all learning about bats today. Hopefully on International Bat Appreciation Day, you got to learn a little bit more about them and learn why we should appreciate them. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. It was really good. You know, I really liked it. You know, I'm always curious about, what our presenters are going to do. And gardening for bats was definitely one I'm curious about.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on some of those native plants you suggested. We were talking about adding to some areas of our garden, some pollinator habitat as well. So yeah, it kind of plays nice with that. Thank you, Franny. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Anybody got any questions for Franny while we got her? I think, Franny, are you going to be able to stick around till after our next segment as well?
Yes.
Okay, so folks, if you do have some questions, one popped in.
Can you repeat the name of the website about bats?
Yes, so it's Bat Conservation International. That's one of the best organizations for bat conservation. I can put a link to it in the chat, and I'll put a link to Kentucky Fish and Wildlife's website as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, again, folks, if you have any other questions for Franny, you can pop those in the chat and we'll get them here in a little bit. But I think we might go ahead and switch gears to the next segment.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah.
So we have Dr. DJ McNeil. He is going to do a bird segment for us.
I know, really appreciate Dr. McNeil doing this, a Wings of Kentucky segment on some early migrants. So we'll go ahead and get that started for you all.
Okay, folks, welcome to another, what was once called Bird of the Month, but we're now calling Wings of Kentucky. We even have a fancy little logo here in the upper left, pretty exciting. And today we're going to be talking about early spring migratory birds that we see here in Kentucky. I had the pleasure of visiting University of Kentucky's Robinson Forest today, and there's actually a ton more migrants than we're discussing today. But we're going to talk about some of the earliest spring migrants that we tend to see here in Kentucky, such as the one shown here. This is the brown thrasher, but we will get to that. Okay, so, and I can't tell if this label is in the way. I'll try and keep it out of the way. This is my first time doing this with Zoom. The first one we're going to talk about is one of the earliest to come back, and that's the common grackle. So the common grackle is this bird that we have here. It's a member of the family Icteridae. It's the blackbird family, so this is a member of the blackbird family. And males and females can sometimes be difficult to tell apart. This is here probably more like a female. This one's probably more like a male. There's some overlap between what males and females look like. In general, males are more colorful. They have a lot more iridescence to them. The tails are larger and more vaulted. So they the tail feathers in the middle of the tail are actually angled downward. So if you were to look at the tail directly from behind, it would be V-shaped. So this is a common grackle, really cool bird, really large bill, bright, kind of creamy white iris. They're a very large blackbird. Some male grackles will almost look more like a crow. They're really an impressive bird. Totally native. They can be kind of a nuisance at bird feeders because they're so big. They'll bully other birds away from the bird feed, and some people may not particularly like that. I think they're very beautiful. I also think their sound is kind of beautiful, but I suspect I'm probably somewhat alone in that opinion. I'll play the songs of the common grackle for you now. This is what the actual song produced by a male to attract a mate sounds like. Certainly not the prettiest song of our songbirds. So with grackles, which are a blackbird, we tend to get other species of icterids, such as the red-winged blackbird, which is of course in that same family. The male is, some birds have horrible names, but the male red-winged blackbird, I think, is an aptly named bird. It is a black bird with a basically red wing. This little yellow stripe is variable. Some birds have almost like bright yellow. Some birds it'll be white. Some birds it'll be mostly absent, just a big red patch. That's a bit variable. The female, on the other hand, tends to look almost more like a sparrow. She's brown and streaky and drab. Some females have a hint of a red wing, but not always. But they have this really acutely tipped, sharp bill, both the male and the female. Red-winged blackbird songs, keeping with the blackbird sort of theme, they're not known for being very beautiful songsters. But they do a very distinct song. The red-winged blackbird song, I learned it as either conqueree or herbal tea. So this is the song of the red-winged blackbird. And there's a quiet dick sissel singing in there. So disregard that and just listen to the conqueree. Okay, so there's our red-winged blackbird. So they tend to show up pretty early, and there are places in Kentucky where you can see red-winged blackbirds all year round. So if you're one of those people, you're like, hey, I don't see this, this isn't a spring migrant, I see them in the winter too. Know that that is true in certain parts of Kentucky. Along with grackles and red-winged blackbirds, we have the third blackbird species we're going to talk about today, and that's the brown-headed cowbird. And the brown-headed cowbird is an interesting blackbird. It's smaller than the other two. And we've got our male here on the left, kind of has that iridescent plumage to the body. And then it's also aptly named. It has this sort of matte brown head. The female, on the other hand, is pretty much entirely drab brown. And actually, the extreme drabness that she has, no wing bars, no streaks, no spots, nothing, that actually is one of the more helpful ways to identify a female cowbird. They're a cool bird for a bunch of reasons. Again, early spring migrant, and there are parts of Kentucky where they are found even in the winter time. But they're what we call a brood parasite. So it's technically native to Kentucky. Probably didn't used to be historically very abundant, but due to widespread intensive agriculture and clearing of forest, which has created a landscape that cowbirds like a bit more than they historically would have, their populations have increased substantially here. And because it's a brood parasite, the female cowbird lays her egg in the nest of another bird, and that other bird raises a baby cowbird alongside its own babies. And they can have a serious effect on some bird populations. Other bird populations don't seem to be terribly bothered by the cowbird. But it's important to keep in mind that it is a native bird, and it has evolved this really interesting life history to survive. Their song is possibly less impressive than the grackle. The male sings a very short song that sounds like a glee or a gurgle glee. There's not a whole lot to it, but it is distinctive, that kind of gurgly, liquidy note followed by the rising Z. Okay, next up, one of my favorites is the eastern phoebe, and this is a very early spring migrant in a lot of parts of Kentucky. They start singing in February, or even occasionally even sooner in certain areas. So it's a really cool bird. It's a member of the flycatcher family. Is a relatively small flycatcher by flycatcher standards. It's not a particularly beautiful bird. I mean, I like them, of course, but I'm an ornithologist, so I'm a little biased. They have these kind of pale, sort of really vague wing bars that don't really stand out. The head, it doesn't have an eye ring. It doesn't have any super distinctive markings. The breast is just plain. The things that I look for with a phoebe are, it's got a very dark head. So it's very dark, especially toward the crown. Some birds almost look black up here. And then when you see the breast, it's kind of like this sort of cream with like a sulfury wash to it. But otherwise, it doesn't have a lot of like really interesting plumage characteristics. What it lacks in beautiful plumage, however, it makes up for in the lovely song. Lovely because it's both pleasing to the ear and because it says its name, or it was probably named because of the way its song sounds like it's saying Phoebe, Phoebe, and it does that over and over and over. It can be a little incessant, but I really like the song of the eastern phoebe. All right. Next up, one of our early spring migrants is the chipping sparrow. I tend to start seeing these in most parts of Kentucky sometime around March. And so they've been here for a little while now. It's a very distinctive little bird. Now, sparrows are tricky for a lot of folks because they're kind of drab, but the chipping sparrow is relatively easy, I would say. So it's a small sparrow. They're kind of squat by sparrow standards. They spend a lot of time on the ground and then they squish down even more. But things to look for, we've got 2 white wing bars here on the secondary coverts, kind of this drab, sort of like streaky mantle that many sparrows have. But then turn your attention to the face and the breast. So the breast is basically kind of gray or white and pretty plain. The throat is very pale and plain. The head is mostly gray and unmarked with the exception of this like dark eye line and a reddish brown cap and this little black bill, white eye stripe, also called a supercilium. And these set of characteristics, especially this bright red cap, tell you that you've got a chipping sparrow. Now, the chipping sparrow's song is a rapid, relatively dry trill, like a really rapid sewing machine or something like that. So this is that trill of that chipping sparrow. You will hear these guys all summer long in your neighborhood. So be on the lookout and to listen out for chipping sparrows this spring. Next is one of my favorites, the white-throated sparrow. Again, sparrows can be really tough, but my God, this is a beautiful, striking bird. Look at this thing. I mean, it's got kind of the standard sparrow phenotype to the back. It's a little bit darker than the chipping sparrow on the undersides, but it's not streaked like a song sparrow would be. But let's look at that head. Just beautiful bird. It's got that white throat where it gets its name from. Gray auriculars. It's got this very dark, basically black eye line, almost a black cap with a white stripe down the middle. And probably my favorite part, white supercilium with this little blaze of yellow. Just a really beautiful bird. Now, I have asterisks here because it's a spring migrant, so to speak. However, it is really more of a they spend the winter here, so they've been here all winter, but they're starting to sing this time of year, and they have a very lovely song. It's a nice clear whistle. Some say it sounds like Poor Sam Peabody, 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 or Oh Sweet Canada, 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 which is where many of them breed. But a very lovely song, the white-throated sparrow. It's hard not to love that. Let's listen one more time. Okay. Next up, we have the Eastern Towhee. Now, I guess I'm keeping with the sparrow theme. The Eastern Towhee doesn't look like a sparrow, but it actually is. And I have the asterisks again because they also really commonly overwinter in Kentucky. You're getting to sense a theme here. A lot of these early spring migrants, many of them actually are here in the winter. And the reason they are also early spring migrants is because most of them are wintering, the ones that are returning in the spring. They probably are short distance migrants, so they're not going very far. And that's the truth with the Eastern Towhee as well. We've got the male here on the left, which has this black kind of hood, black back, and black tail with, it's a little hard to see in this image, but it has white edges on the tail, and it has some white markings on the primaries and occasionally on the tertials. Also very distinctive is this bright rufous patch on both the male and the female. The female basically looks like the male, but everywhere where he's black, she's brown. It used to be called the rufous-sided towhee, which is where it got that name from this rufous patch here on the side. But it doesn't look like a sparrow in terms of color, but it morphologically does have that kind of very long-legged look. They're very comfortable on the ground. They have a very fun song too. It's a very nice, a very loud, drink your tea. So to be clear, we do have towhees all winter long in parts of Kentucky, but as spring continues to advance, many of these towhees are migrating north from places like the southern United States, and we are going to be quickly overburdened with lots of eastern towhees. So we'll enjoy them while they're here in their high numbers. Next, we have our brown thrasher from the title slide. So this is a cool bird. They come back very early, usually February or March. Really striking bird. Look at this very long bill. Kind of reminds me almost of a road runner or something. Really long tail, relatively short little wings. Bright yellow eye, very striking. It's kind of this brown and like white color scheme. Brown on the back. We've got white wing bars here, light underneath, and then these streaky spots down the breast. Relatively long legs. It's in the family Mimidae. So as you might expect, Mimidae is a family of birds that are famous for mimicking the sounds of other birds, and the brown thrasher is no exception. They are one of the first migrant mimids that we receive, and we're going to talk about two other mimids, or mimics, if you will, but birds in the family Mimidae. We're going to talk about two more. But the brown thrasher is a bird that repeats the songs of other birds, and it basically will say, all right, I like this bird, I'm going to steal that song, and then I like this other bird, I'm going to steal its song, and this other one, and steal its song, and they'll steal other wildlife sounds or any sounds they hear, like they may incorporate frog calls into their repertoire. But what they'll do is they'll string together a whole series of mimicked phrases into one long song. And here's the key with the brown thrasher. The brown thrasher obsessively strings together every note 2 times in a row. So it'll do 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and string all of those notes together like that. So let's listen to an example. So let's listen one more time. And when we're listening to the brown thrasher, we're listening for paired repeated notes. Okay, so I would be remiss if I didn't at least talk about the other two mimids. The next up is the northern mockingbird. Now I have our asterisks again. They're actually not really particularly migratory, at least to my knowledge. In Kentucky, they're a year-round resident. They're here in the winter and everything. But, you know, it's worth throwing them in here because, well, for comparison, really, with the other two mimids. We've talked about the northern mockingbird on Wings of Kentucky before, but it's this kind of medium gray overall. The tail and the wings are a darker gray, white wing bars, paler below, and when you see the wings open, it's got big white patches on the wings that are very distinctive. The thing about the mockingbird song, unlike the brown thrasher, remember the thrasher repeats everything twice. The mockingbird repeats everything 3 or more times. So let's listen to that northern mockingbird. Try that again. Here we go. Okay, now our last mimid we're going to talk about is the gray catbird. So the gray catbird, it doesn't arrive as early as the brown thrasher does, but a little bit later. And I see there was a record today here in Jacobson Park here in central Lexington. And gray catbirds, they're a cool bird. They're a mimid, like I said, easy to identify. It's overall this like relatively dark gray bird, darker gray on the tail, black cap, and these rusty sort of chestnut colored undertail coverts. Now the catbird gets its name because it produces a call that sounds a bit like a cat meowing, or actually can sound pretty convincingly like a cat meowing, but it's a mimid, so that its true song is actually repeating notes from other birds. Remember, the brown thrasher repeats everything twice, the mockingbird repeats everything 3 times, the catbird repeats everything once. So let's have a listen. Okay, next up, the killdeer. So the killdeer is a really cool bird. And again, a lot of these birds you can sort of find during mild winter and in southern Kentucky and areas at low elevation. You can find some of these birds in the winter, but we really get the majority of our killdeer in the springtime, and they're an early spring migrant bird. And you can see it looks quite different than the other birds we've looked at today, and that's because we've mostly been looking at songbirds or passerines. The killdeer is actually a species of shorebird, just like the woodcock, which we talked about during the March Wings of Kentucky. And the killdeer is another shorebird, and unlike most shorebirds, it does not nest near, or sorry, yes, unlike most shorebirds, it does not nest near the shore, which is similar to what the woodcock does. But unlike the woodcock, it also doesn't really nest much in early successional forest. In fact, killdeer are really at home in parking lots and urban areas, very unusual by shorebird standards. Really easy to ID. Notice these long legs here. It's got this kind of brown back, mostly brown head, bright white underparts. It's got these little white and black markings on the face. Very distinctively, though, are two bands across the breast. Very distinctive. Now, a lot of people ask, what the heck? Killdeer, what kind of name is that? Well, it gets its name from its call, which sounds like it's saying, kill deer, kill deer. You may have to use your imagination a little bit with that one. Okay, we've only got a few more. Another one here, the black-throated green warbler, is a species you're much more likely to hear than you are to see. It's a very small bird, beautiful, and relatively aptly named, I would say. It's got this kind of greenish back, this black throat with streaks down the flank. Excuse me, lovely bird. And they're singing all over in Lexington and various parts of Kentucky right now. If you go out to a wooded area today or tomorrow, you should hear black-throated green warblers singing. And they have a very distinctive song. It's a high-pitched and buzzy trill that sounds like they're saying, trees, 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 I love trees. Trees, 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 I love trees. You might have to use your imagination just a hair with that one. Some of these mnemonics aren't perfect, but they do well enough to help us remember. Okay, next here we have the blue-headed vireo. This is a very early spring migrant. Again, they tend to start showing up in decent numbers in February and March. Vireos they're an interesting family of birds. They're kind of weird. They sort of resemble warblers, but they're a little bigger. And this picture doesn't show it well, but they have a slightly hooked tip on their bill. They're actually related to shrikes, so they're a pretty cool group of birds. The blue-headed vireo, I think, is relatively well named. It's got this like sulfury flank and this white underside, but it does have that really nice sort of bluish gray head and then these white spectacles that kind of go around its eye. The song is a very squeaky, repetitive, here I am. Where are you? I'm here. What about you? Okay, and I believe this may be the last one for this month's Wings of Kentucky, the tree swallow. So we have a variety of different species of swallow here in Kentucky. The tree swallow tends to be the first one that we see, at least in decent numbers. Very easy to ID. They spend most of their time on the wing, but I figured I'd show you perched birds here. It's better to, I guess, get a good gauge on what we're looking at. They're this very nice, like kind of iridescent blue on top with these very long primary flight feathers because they spend so much time flying, with a white throat and white underparts. Now, this is what most tree swallows you see will look like. You will occasionally see birds that look like this. Notice the bright white throat, clean white breast, and white underparts. And this one's got a hint of blue to it. Some may not. My understanding is that when you see birds like this, these are first year or technically second year, but you know, young of the year, recent females, birds that are nesting for the first time, and they're always female. So in the bird world, we call it a second year female. So those are birds that they were hatched last year. So this would be a bird in her first breeding season, but most females, after they've been around for a year or two, look pretty much like an adult male does. They produce a wide variety of calls, usually liquidy chirps and a variety of noises that are usually kind of a liquidy, watery quality. Okay, with that, I'd like to say thank you for tuning in to this month's Wings of Kentucky.
I always love those. A lot of those I knew.
Yeah.
Some of them I had never heard before. I was just telling you the mockingbird. I was like, oh my gosh, we have one of those at the house. And midnight, he's like chirping every bird call ever. And I'm just like, would you please hush? No one is awake but you.
You love the birds.
I do.
At the
but
appropriate
not
time.
Right,
Yes.
He's out there by himself.
No. Oh, no. Thank you, Dr. McNeil. We appreciate him putting that together. It was good.
Mhm.
Yeah. Renee and I were sitting here kind of chatting back and forth. As we
Heard
were
that one.
watching it. Yeah.
That one.
Oh, that was cool.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
I really appreciate that. That brings me up to a good point. There may be things that people want to learn about that, that deal with our natural world
Right.
that they're not aware of. Right. But they want to kind of learn more about it. Let us know. Right. If whether you're a podcast listener or a YouTube viewer, or you're with us via Zoom, if there's a topic you'd like to see us cover that deals with forestry or wildlife or natural resources here in Kentucky, let us know and we'll try to put together a show for you. I know Renee does an amazing job kind of tracking down the appropriate people, and we've got a lot of contacts. So if we can be of service to you all, getting some good content, let us know.
Yeah, we're always looking for show ideas. I mean, you have to realize, we do this almost weekly.
Yes.
I think minus maybe 2 or 3 a year. And so we're constantly looking for at least 1 to 2 to possibly 3 ideas each week. So that's a lot of shows to fill.
Yeah. So let us know what you'd like to see, and we'll do our best to try to accommodate, because if you've got a question about it, there's a good chance that others out there do as well. So
exactly.
Hey, Franny, if you're around, we'll pull you back up. It looks like we might have a question for you.
All right.
All right. So when I don't know the answer to a question, I Googled it and I was getting a lot of making baseball bats out of birch, which apparently it is good for. But I did find one website that says that for northeastern bats, such as the tricolored bat, which we do have in Kentucky, birch is a good tree. So I imagine it's the same in Kentucky as well. It's saying tricolored bats prefer to roost in leaf clusters and under birch bark. So that was a really good tree to bring up as well.
Yeah, and I think, river birch is such a cool tree with its bark. I think, where it kind of, flakes off, and people, it makes sense that it might be one of those places that could provide some good habitat. Right. Maybe not as good as a shagbark or shellbark hickory, but still some good habitat. So good question. Franny, really do appreciate you coming on, being part of the show today, and all you're doing here in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources and part of our extension team. So thank you. Really do appreciate it.
We have another comment here. Let's see if
Reading the question.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, hopefully it will come back.
I was going to say, snap a picture. Fortunately, we have a resident entomologist and Dr. Jonathan Larson, and he helps us out all the time if there's something we're not aware of. But if you happen to have an image of that caterpillar from previous, send it to us and we'll try to look it up for you and see what you got.
Yeah, and you could send that to forestry.extension@uky.edu and we will get that answered for you.
Yeah, you could also upload it on our little survey that we have on fromthewoods.today.com. So if you do have an image of something you've seen in your woods or on your property that you don't know what it is, let us know. Share it with us and we'll try to help you. Hopefully it's not a new invasive plant or insect.
Hopefully not.
But if it is, Franny will help us. Yes, because that's one of the areas that Franny works in for sure.
She would rather know about it now than find out about it a year from now and then it's a problem. So we greatly appreciate that.
All right.
Well, another thing you can do on fromthewoods.today.com is there is if you want to subscribe to our shows. So we've got that worked out now where if you click on subscribe, say you're already a subscriber.
Right.
But you're like, you know what? I'd really like advance notices. Because I normally send something out about the show anywhere between 1 to 2 hours before the show, just to remind people.
Sure.
But what if you really want to know 1 to 3 days in advance? Well, we now have that option. So you can, if you click on that, it will change yours. If you check, I would want to be an early notifier from the Woods Today. You can check that, and you'll get notifications about the show 1 to 3 days in advance instead of just 1 to 2 hours in advance. Check both, and you'll get both.
Oh, that's a nice service, because I know we have a lot of listeners and viewers out there. So let them know what's coming. It's a great thing. So
exactly.
Awesome.
And we have started now. I have some students working with us, and we've started now creating a calendar. So on each one of those, you'll see the calendar for what's coming up for the next 4 shows.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful as well.
No, we ought to give a big shout out to the students because they help so much in so many things. We're so blessed to have some student workers that work here in our department, and you know, I don't want to embarrass them giving their names, but they are really great. And we're really appreciative of them. And what
definitely, like one of them edits the show and posts it online for the YouTube channel, and another student of ours creates some of the Facebook posts that you see. So and all the constant contacts I send out. So it really does help. Actually, I have 3 different ones helping to do this show. So well, awesome.
we do a lot of stuff out of our organization, so we really need all the help we can get. So
we really do.
All right. Well, Franny, I'm not seeing any other questions right now, but we do appreciate you very much, and I know we'll have you back on again real soon. And again, thank you for being part of From the Woods Today.
Thank you.
You know, so that's all we have for today, but it was a really great show. You know, talking about bats and talking about the different kinds of birds that are coming through right now. It was really fun.
Yeah, getting to hear all those different birds and learning what we could do to help bats. Yeah, again, thanks to our guests, and thank you all for being part of From the Woods Today. We'll certainly look forward to seeing everybody next week at 11.
Take care. Bye.
From the Woods Today.